welcome back to another episode of Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Zachary Smith. That is Derrick Bell for the second time this week, a bonus episode of DB. I know nobody's going to complain about seeing more DB on the channel. Derrick, how we doing, pal?
Doing well, man. Been an exciting week. Almost to the end of it, but got some interesting questions from the Twitter sphere to talk about. Ready to talk some Steelers ball.
Yeah. We would love a news drop right about now as we are recording this. We would absolutely love it. Just something dropped, absolutely drop the hammer or something, because this week, I'll be honest, has been a grind. Out on vacation, obviously, not a whole lot of news happening. So we appreciate the questions. Been doing like mailbag type episodes. So we're going to continue on with that trend to close out the week here. So we appreciate, like we said, those coming in from you guys. We'll start off with John. How dumb is the talk of Alex Highsmith being traded, and who brought it up? So I can't for sure say that Pony was the first guy, not the only guy for sure now, but I don't even know if he was the first guy necessarily. He was the first one that I feel like made other people feel like it had legs, and there's nothing there. Just to put that out there right now. There's absolutely nothing to this, nothing with this. But Brandon Aiyuk trade compensation has been hard for people to figure out. Now, I can understand why people would throw Alex Highsmith's name in there for one reason, just to offset the cost of that, obviously. With what Alex Highsmith is making on a per year basis, if Brandon Aiyuk's going to get like 30 million, you figure, okay, at least this takes away some of that. But it's just funny because it's like, I don't know how he's picking these players like Alex Highsmith and Calvin Austin. Before it was Nick Herbig, Calvin Austin, second round pick. Like, what are we doing here? Where is this coming from, Derrick? Do you have any takes or thoughts on this whatsoever?
Yeah, I mean, if there's anyone who's just mentally exhausted from hearing about Brandon Ayuk, even as a huge Brandon Ayuk fan, would love him on the Steelers. It is I. However, yeah, some of the trade scenarios, man, I'm seeing all these trade scenario simulations pop up on the Twitter sphere about, can you get him for a second round pick, and now we're throwing in like really good players for the Steelers. Basically, what like in this hypothetical scenario, trading Alex Highsmith for Brandon Aiyuk, like you're solving one hole to create another one. Like, as much as I like Nick Herbig, we have a very, very limited sample size of
Apples to
Herbig actually
oranges here. Apples to
playing.
oranges here. How similar to Deontay Johnson for Dante Jackson, just in terms of solving one issue maybe by creating another.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically what we're doing. What we're doing here, man. Like, and as much as I like Nick Herbig, I'm really excited to see what he does, like in an edge three role. I think they should be more creative in the ways that they deploy him on defense. I would like to see some three edge sets this year on passing downs. Herbig is still fighting some historical outlier stuff in order to ever be considered like a starter at the NFL level. Like, you talk about the lack of length, like he's not the biggest guy. Dude, it does look like he's got maybe a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger in the offseason. As excited as I am for that, like, this dude has played only a handful of snaps. He didn't play very much last year. And you're trading a guy in Alex Highsmith who is a proven good edge player, someone that you just extended last offseason and are going to take on dead money just to trade him. It just doesn't make any sense to me, like, whatsoever.
You know what? I wasn't even thinking about the dead money aspect of this. I'm actually going to look that up now as we were
It's
talking. But
it's like 5.5 million, I think, is what it is.
for this year, I mean, but in total, is that really all it is in total? Or you just mean this year it's five and a
Yeah.
half?
There was only, I think, with Highsmith's deal, I think there was a little over like 17 million in fully guaranteed money.
Yes, 17.01 fully guaranteed at signing. Yeah. So signing bonus plus his 2023 salary really was what it was. You
Yep.
know what? Yeah, the structure of this contract is actually pretty interesting when you look at it like this.
Yeah, it's very, like, that was something that I brought up, like, when I did like a breakdown on my channel talking about what I thought Alex Highsmith would get before he signed, and then I did a breakdown after he signed. And I actually think that some people kind of freaked out a little bit because I think when he signed, he was like the 11th highest paid edge rusher, and people were talking about, oh, he's not a top 10 edge, yada yada yada. But if you actually look at the contract, like, it's relatively team friendly. Like, I think
Yeah.
the total money in terms of like what he's getting APY, like 17 million, I think that may have seemed a little bit high at the time. But I think when you look at this contract, it's really interesting because, yeah, there's a little bit of built in, like, okay, we expect this dude to continue to get a little bit better to warrant having a $20 million cap hit in 2026. But there's some outs for the Steelers to get out of this contract, assuming like if he just absolutely flopped or couldn't stay healthy or any of those things. Neither of those things I think are actually happening, but I think there's a realistic possibility where, if Highsmith has a little bit better of a positive sack kind of regression, he actually had like better advanced numbers last year than he did the year before, even though his sack total dropped. You look at the pressure rate, pass rush win rate, those things increased. I think he was a little unlucky in the number of sacks he got. You get some positive regression there. We're talking about like, potentially being a really team friendly contract in 2 years, provided
Sure.
he's healthy. So, as much as I like Brandon Aiyuk, I think like people probably also need to just come to the realization that, yeah, is there a chance that he could get dealt? I think that San Francisco, the way they handle contracts is really interesting to me. I think that they're going to keep Ayuk, but I think that a lot of people just need to understand like this thing's going to cost a first round pick or some type of equivalent for that. Like, I think a lot of trade scenarios are like people in the media or people in the fan base trying to figure out or how to skate around having to give up a first round pick. Like, this dude's was absolutely a top 10 receiver, all pro caliber receiver last year. Has some similarities from a numerical standpoint of like AJ Brown when he got traded from the Titans to the Eagles. You look at the cost and what it's costed other teams to acquire elite wide receivers in the last 5 years. It's been a first round pick. Like, you're going to have to give that up if you want this type of player. And yeah, I don't know. I think people probably just need to come to the realization that that's what it's going to cost and stop trying to be like cheap or come away with just all these random scenarios that aren't really realistic.
Yeah. And with his trade request again, and Nick and I had this conversation on Wednesday, probably at like step 3. Like it definitely this needed to happen, right? If he is going to be dealt, but
It's a
it's going to have
leverage
to
play.
get a lot uglier. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a leverage
Which
play.
he doesn't have much of.
Yeah.
And
So
he's
there
just
was
trying to do
actually
what he can.
there was someone from the Athletic that reached out to me earlier this week and asked about, if I thought it was going to happen, if I was hearing anything, yada yada. My whole thing was like, the Niners have the leverage. Like, Ayuk's trade request was a necessary step on his part, but the Niners still own all of the leverage. Like, they have him on the 5th-year option this year, but they also have the franchise tag option like the following year. So really, they've
Yeah.
got two. And you're not even like, yes, the franchise tag is expensive, but like that's the thing. Like, you're going to like the franchise tag's a built-in option for the team, and they're not going to have any problem giving him that amount of money for like a 1-year salary. I mean, that's what he's going. He's going to get an extreme amount of money regardless of what contract extension he were to sign. So, I mean, they basically have 2 years of control over Ayuk. Of course, you can franchise guys twice, but it's just a lot more expensive
Yeah.
to do it the second time. But I don't think it's going to get to that point. I think they're going to run it back, and then the Niners will probably end up just deciding between Ayuk or Debo next offseason. And then we'll probably be doing this same song and dance leading up to the NFL draft again. But I don't know, man. I just I don't see it happening, but it is what it is. We'll see, I guess. I know it's
I want to know who the
one more
next
thing
name is going to
too.
be.
Yeah, I mean, one more thing too. Like, I think we're just in that time of the off season. Like, this is the official dead period. Like, leading up to training camp, there's just not a lot to talk about. So I understand why this thing is kind of just it's drawing a lot of the headlines, even if it's really just baseless speculation at this point.
Sure. Yeah, I want to know who the next player is that gets thrown into a trade scenario. Alex Highsmith, like I said, I feel like it's because of the money. Like, he offsets some of that cost, so that is why I feel like his inclusion was part of this. Plus, he is a really good player.
Yeah.
Jonathan says, I think most people will agree that Queen will lead our off-ball linebackers in snaps. Assuming Holcomb is healthy for week 1, rank him, Roberts, and Wilson 2 through 4 in terms of total snap counts on the year. This is interesting. I feel like we haven't really talked much about this in terms of what that rotation could look like, assuming that Cole Holcomb is ready to go.
Yeah, it's really interesting. As far as like snap counts, man, like a lot of that is gonna play into like how healthy these guys are able to stay, right? Like, I definitely agree that Queen's kind of the every down guy. I mean, you're paying a guy that much money. I think you look at Queen's skill set. I think he has the requisite tools to fill that kind of role of being an every down linebacker. Now, the rotation aside from him is going to be really interesting. I think it is going to be very mix and match heavy. To me, I think him and a Landon are a really good pairing, especially on early
Yeah.
downs. He allowed Landon to kind of fill that thumper role. Both those guys good blitzers. Holcomb's the true wild card, man. Like, just because like I still don't think that we have enough clarity on his health to really make a proclamation about, his involvement in this defense next year. Like, I think that we really need to see him put on the pads and get out there on the field, not just in practice, but probably in some preseason games before I really feel good about kind of making a prediction on how involved he's going to be in the defense. And then, Peyton Wilson, they've thrown some hints around about potentially using him in the dime, getting him in some special packages. He's a guy who, blitzed a lot while at NC State, obviously has an incredible athletic profile, has a lot of range at the second level, can do some things in coverage as well. I think there's some potential there. So I don't know. I would say for me, it probably it's going to be Queen, Roberts, Holcomb, Wilson,
Yep.
and 2 and 3 could
That's all I
probably
think.
be flop, just depending on, it's always tough because, like, Holcomb's making more money than
Mhm.
Roberts is, and that I know that doesn't seem like it should matter, but it does matter sometimes. Those guys are typically afforded a little bit more opportunity, but I think the injury that Holcomb's coming off of does make things a lot more cloudy.
I really like you. I really like the pairing of Queen and Roberts together. I'm in the same boat in terms of ranking those there. And again, that's kind of giving Cole Holcomb the benefit of the doubt injury wise. I feel like too. I mean, really be giving him the benefit of the doubt if you think he's going to play the second most snaps of the off ball linebackers.
Hmm.
But yeah, I'm gonna go with the same Queen, Roberts, Holcomb, and Wilson. But for me, you said 2 and 3 to be switched. I think it would be 3 and 4 just based off Holcomb's health. Like, is he even
Right.
going to be ready for week
Sure.
1? How early is he going to be ready? So we'll see there. And again, I brought this up on this. Actually, it hasn't even come out yet because we upload the show on Saturdays. But the last around the 4-2 Steelers show that comes out tomorrow, I brought up the possibility of, like, is Landon Roberts a sneaky potential extension candidate as well? Like, if there's gonna be two guys and you're looking for one that's kind of like under the radar, I don't see the quarterbacks happening. If it's a running back, it's not Najee. We know it's not gonna be James Daniels. I don't know. The Cam situation is just weird to me at this point. Maybe something gets done. Predictively, I think Pat is going to get done. I keep saying predictively because I want to put that out there. That's not like information. Just I think that something is going to get done predictively. Um, is a Landon Roberts maybe a sneaky extension candidate? And if so, would that make you put him ahead of Holcomb on the pecking order?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing, something I really haven't thought a ton about. I mean, Roberts is, he's going into his age 30 season. And I think too,
Mhm.
like, one thing I kind of do want to mention that, Roberts is the prototypical thumper. I don't think anyone would confuse him necessarily for a coverage linebacker, but he actually had some pretty good moments last year in coverage, man. Like,
Yeah.
he was not he was a guy that I think I and some other people kind of expected to be a complete liability in that phase of the game, just because where he's been in previous stops in New England and Miami under Flores, under Belichick. He's really had a very specified role. He's good at the things that he does, and they wanted to keep him away from some of the other elements of the position. And just because the Steelers had so much injuries last year, they kind of needed him to do more than he's even really accustomed to doing. And I thought he had some like pretty good moments. I think, even thinking back to that Buffalo playoff game, which was really a disaster, really across the board, but
Mhm.
he made that really good play. I think it was on Dalton Kincaid running that deep kind of pylon route where he was able to stay in phase, run with him stride for stride vertically, and ended up, forcing that incompletion. And that wasn't the only thing that he did well in coverage last year. So he wasn't a complete liability, and I think that says that maybe he could take on a little bit more responsibility, and maybe they do look at him as more of a long-term option rather than a short-term option. That could definitely change the dynamic between him and Holcomb. It's just like I said, it's really difficult to say right now, just because another thing with Holcomb is this isn't an isolated injury. Like, it is and it isn't. Like, obviously the significant leg injury is what we're referring to, but like, this is a guy that's had trouble staying healthy his entire career. So like, when you start to rack
When we
up,
signed him, the
that was
talk
the thing.
was the foot, right? Like he
Yeah.
had missed this time with his foot injury. Obviously, the Steelers have to feel comfortable about him with him getting a 3-year contract. But now this. So
Yeah.
like you said, it's not like he had a clean bill of health prior to.
Yeah, and I do think that changes the discussion a little bit too, because if you look at Holcomb's contract, and I hate to see we don't, when we talk like contract and numbers, it is important context for the fans and listeners. Like, we're not trying to necessarily say like we want these guys kicked off the team or anything like that. But it's just it's a business aspect that you have to discuss, and that's why I kind of said that like I have to kind of see him on the field to put him back in the lineup, in the fold of how I'm viewing this defense, really this season. But if you even look at like his contract, like if he doesn't play, the first week or two of training camp, and I have no clue if he's going to, but like the
Mhm.
Steelers could save like 4.5 million on the cap. They do take on like 3 million, I think, of dead money or something like that, but they do save some cap space if they were to let him go. Um, and obviously that, I think they like the depth that they had of an inside linebacker just because you saw all the injuries kind of, take fold there at that position. It's a really physical position. I like the depth, and I'm not saying I'm an advocate necessarily for saying that they definitely should cut him right now. It's just, it is, I think all possibilities are on the table. Like there's a chance he could not be on this roster. There's a chance that he could be, the second best player at the position, like for 2024. I don't really know. It's impossible to predict for me.
You mentioned the depth, just brought back Tyler Medikevich as well. I mean, special teams purposes first and foremost with his work there. But we just talked about on Wednesday, I did with Nick. Mark Robinson, is he fighting for his life on the 53-man roster
Sure.
this training camp? And then you add Tyler Medikevich into that, and you think it's for that purpose. Maybe it pushes Mark Robinson off the roster. Maybe they do have a better idea of what's going on with Cole Holcomb, and they don't think he's going to be ready early. And maybe, like you're saying, there's the possibility that he doesn't even, get through training camp without being cut. I don't know. Like you
Sure.
said, all options seemingly on the table right now.
Yeah. I do think too, like that is something that I'm glad you brought up with Matakevich, because I wrote an article for Steelers Now yesterday, just about some of the moves that the Steelers have been making, kind of behind the scenes, kind of on the low, that haven't been discussed a ton. This, with the rule changes taking place, they're
Mhm.
adopting something similar to like the XFL kickoff rules. I think special teams is going to be something we're going to talk about a lot more from a content or a media perspective, but it's going to become like a lot more of a talking point, because I think that phase of the game is going to be a lot more important this year and
Yeah.
moving forward. You think about some of the moves that they've made, brought in one of the best returnmen of all time, Cordero Patterson. Hopefully he still has some juice left in the tank. And then, they bring back a captain from last year, Miles Killebrew. Both those guys over 30, but they got 2-year deals. So that means like they're pretty much locks to make the roster this year. And then, you go and bring back a fan favorite, a special teams ace, and Matakevich. Similar to Killebrew, those guys have stayed in the league 8-9 years now. They've never really done anything on defense aside from just play special teams. And like that's how they've been able to carve out really successful professional careers. And I think that the Steelers have, not that they haven't always had a guy or two that has strictly been a special teams player, but I think when you look at, those three, some of the other guys that they have, I think that are going to be interesting special teams names, like Darius Rush. I mentioned him in the article. He has a special teams background from college. I think Peyton Wilson, his athleticism could be really interesting too on that phase
Yeah.
of the ball. I think that they've placed a little bit more of a priority on special teams this offseason. And I think that that's, something I've talked about too in like some of the live streams I've done. I think the special teams phase of the game with Danny Smith and just the new kickoff rules, I think it's a way to kind of get really innovative and kind of set yourself apart from the other teams just because there's so much unknown. But when you look at the Steelers, they're going to be in a lot of probably close games, a lot of low scoring games. Special teams is going to be really important. It's a way to, what I talk about, winning the margins. And I'm excited to see like, just how creative they can get and the different ways that these guys can provide an impact.
Guys, you mentioned Ryan Watts, if he can make the roster,
Yeah,
just
another guy.
screams special teams guy to me. I mentioned Mark Robinson, if he's able to carve
Mhm.
out a role, so yeah, I do think that special teams can certainly be a strength. Will obviously be much better in the punting department this year with
Sure.
Cam Johnston being an upgrade. So I think, just across the board, they should be better in the special teams aspect. Ryan says, any way KZ could play slot and be the rundown slot in terms of body type, built pretty similar to Mike Hilton, very physical relative to his size, in my opinion. What's interesting is he mentioned the one safety out of like the safeties that are going to play in 3 safety sets that I wouldn't think is going to see a ton of times. Like, I think that I know that we keep preaching this idea of getting Minka away from doing those types of things and playing Minka ball. but I think he's going to have to contribute in the slot, especially early in the season, without Cam Sutton being a part of that. And I think Deshaun Elliott, same. I think that he could see snaps in the slot as well when we see three safeties on the field. So, what's your take on this? Do you think that we see Damontae Kazee in that role at all, or do you think we see him, more as like the deep safety if one of those other guys are moving around, or what are you envisioning for his role?
Yeah, I kind of think that Casey's going to remain kind of as the deep safety when they go to three safety looks. Now, who knows how much they want to use the three safety looks, right? Like those were wildly successful 2 years ago, not so much last year. Now, of course, we mentioned the injuries at linebacker. I mean, they were decimated by injuries at safety as well. But if
Shout
I
out
know,
Trenton
like,
Thompson.
yeah, shout out Trenton Thompson. But I know, we talked a little bit about KZ so far this offseason, going into his age, I think 31 season. You know, he hasn't played slot corner since 2019. Like he really, since
Mm,
he came out of San Diego State, this is a guy who's played primarily center field. Like that's what he's played. You look at like it just his snaps across the board. Like the prior season, 2018 in Atlanta, played 828 snaps to center field. Like that's what he does. I think that his ball hawk mentality, and his ability to read the quarterback, I think is really his strongest trait. He is a little bit of a gambler, so you got to take that in mind as well. I also think too, just like body type kind of comes into play. Like when we're talking about this, I mean, KZ's listed 174. He's a thin dude. Like his frame is very, very skinny. That was something I remember from him even coming out. He is a guy that I think tries to punch above his weight, but I don't think like he's an exceptional tackler, even for the safety position. You roll him down in the box, try to get him, there's going to be situations where he could be forced into the run fit, make more tackles against the run. I think that's going to be more difficult. I would definitely say that Elliott, has probably a better chance to play
mhm.
in that regard. And then, I think in the three safety sets, maybe Elliott's the slack corner on early downs or something like that. Maybe Minka kind of is rolling down into, the hook drops, and then you use Elliott or use KZ, excuse me, kind of as the deep center fielder. But, it is interesting. I think they're going to have to get creative, like you mentioned with the Cam Sutton suspension. We knew that was coming, but there's just not a lot of proven options really on the roster right now to really say for sure this is how it's going to play out. But, Elliott, even last year, he played a lot of free safety, but he did have, over 100 snaps in the slot as well. He's a guy who's done pretty much all three positions over the course of his career.
Yeah, I mean, so again, I just thought it was funny because he brought up the one safety out of the three that I would say isn't
Elliott's
going to see
210.
much
He's
time.
listed 210, a lot bigger. He's got 40
Yeah,
pounds on KZ.
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I get it. I do think Casey's gonna have a role. I just don't think it's that
Sure.
role. I think that, whether it's Josiah Scott, Beanie Bishop, somebody else that's gonna carve out a role in the slot, or I'm sorry, Deshaun Elliott, like we're talking about, like
Hmm.
those to me scream that role before Damontae Kazee. So, and then last thing here, stick with the secondary. Snides, our guy, Chop Chop. I know you're very familiar with him as well. Big supporter of your channel and everything that you do over there. Will JPJ follow wide receiver one at an even higher rate this season? What percentage chance does he have to be a top 10 corner in the league by season's end, in your opinion?
I guess my question is, are we sure that he's not already there? I mean,
Mm,
I think there's like a legitimate argument for him to be in that conversation. I don't think, I'm not saying that he is definitely there. I think that there's definitely some things that he needs to continue to clean up. You look at the penalties. I think that those are probably always going to be a thing just because of his style of ball. Um, but the numbers last year were really freaking good, man. About a month ago, I wrote a piece for Steelers Now, just talking about the ceiling for Porter.
mhm.
But you look at the numbers from his rookie season, man. Like completion percentage, 38.5%, second in the NFL, yards per coverage snap, fourth yards per attempt, fourth passer rating, second. This is a guy who was extremely good, not just for a rookie, but just extremely good in general. And then you add the necessary context that he was following number one wide receivers around for the most part. You think of some of his, games against DeAndre Hopkins, some of the other marquee guys that he was tasked with defending as a rookie right away. Pretty good results, man. Pretty good results. I think some of the other things that I think are really easy to clean up or should be. Just he needs to get better, more fundamentally sound as a tackler, particularly against the run. But I think you saw improvement from him as the season went on. But I just think that, his length, the way that he can affect the passing lanes, the way that he can kind of dictate the game with his physicality, I absolutely think he could be a top 10 corner maybe as soon as this year if he's not already there.
Yeah, I was just saying, like, I mean, you're talking off the top of your head, but I think he's in that conversation. Like, if he's not top 10, probably somewhere in the 12 to 15 range
Yeah.
right now. But you're talking about a guy in year two. Like, a lot of the guys I feel like are that you would maybe have like a Jalen Ramsey, Marshawn Lattimore that are they're descending players. Like, they're still good players,
Hmm.
but they're not still ascending in terms of where they're at. Joey Porter Jr. obviously still getting better. And I almost feel like, as long as he continues to play the way that he did his rookie year, and I'm not saying that this should or shouldn't be the case, right? But like as he develop a reputation in the league, you almost feel like could he potentially start getting away with some of the penalties just
True.
because of the name value that he holds as we
Yeah.
get deeper into his career as well. ESPN just recently did a top 10 corner rankings, by the way. He was not listed in the top 10. He did, however, receive some votes to be in there. Wasn't even high enough to get honorable mention. But he received some votes. Other guys that were in, actually, Martin Emerson Jr., insane year last year, too. He wasn't in the top 10, wasn't even honorable mention. He received some votes for that as well. Same with Ron Bland, obviously, all the interceptions, but what did he give up? Like 1,200 yards in coverage as
Sure.
well. So, I don't know. It's interesting. Like, who do you have names that you feel like he's kind of like in the mix with already? Like for me, PS2, Pat Surtain is number one for me. I know a lot of the Sauce Gardner gets talked about a ton. I would have PS2 above him. Who are the
Hmm.
guys at the top for you?
Yeah. I mean, Sertan at the top of the list for me, just the way that he moves for his body profile, very different. I think Sauce, another guy, playing in that, quarters heavy system in New York, another guy that can play off and at the line of scrimmage. I think that's kind of the thing for me is like when you're talking about ceiling, that makes it maybe there are some limitations to Porter just because I do think he's really scheme specific in the fact that like you very much want him at the line of scrimmage because that's where he's most comfortable. That's why even through the pre-draft process, I thought that it was really important for him to land in the right spot because you don't want him playing off coverage. Like he's not a dude that's really comfortable in his back pedal. The further away from the line of scrimmage, the more I feel like his physical gifts are kind of depreciated.
Mhm.
Whereas a guy like Sauce is equally effective at the line of scrimmage as he is kind of playing off in that 8 to 10 yard range. Maybe that's kind of like a ceiling for him. Is like I don't know if he could ever be as versatile as a guy like PS2 or Sauce, but I do think like top 10 is absolutely in the range of realistic outcomes. Just because the things that he can do in terms of just closing space and just dominating with physicality and taking away one side of the field in press coverage is pretty remarkable, man. Especially like I just think that the improvements that he made from his final year at Penn State to his rookie year in Pittsburgh, how he cleaned up
Mhm.
some of the false steps at the line of scrimmage. Like I said, I think some of the grabbiness and some of the physicality, you're always just going to have to live with that. But dude, like we just saw L'Jarius Sneed cash a huge contract with health concerns. Same kind of type of player, really grabby, really physical, likes to play at the line of scrimmage. I think Sneed is a better tackler than Porter is right now. But that's the kind of player that I feel like we're probably talking about, which is like a legitimate CB1 and having that guy on a rookie contract for the next 3 years. Um, Pretty huge for the Steelers defense. I think Porter's a really good player, and I think he's only going to continue to get better.
L'Jarius Sneed, by the way, number 4 on this list. It was crazy to me. I had like a weird look on my face
Sure.
at one point as you were talking there because somebody had Pat Surtain as number 10. Like it shows what their
Yeah.
lowest ranking was, what their highest ranking was, and where they were at last year. Somebody had him as number 10. I'm like,
Well, like I didn't
who
see
in
the
the
list.
world?
I didn't see the list, but like, and this isn't anything against like this player, but was Derek Stingley in the top 10?
Number 10. He is number 10.
Okay, so like here's the deal. Like I love Stingley coming out. Like I think he was like I don't know. He was definitely top 10 on my big board. Really like Stingley a lot. Stingley put together a really good year last year, but it was like 10 good games. Like in terms of like the sample size, we have just as much sample size of Joey Porter Jr. being a really good corner as we do Derek Stingley. Now I think Stingley again, a little more versatility in terms of like the coverages, the way that you can deploy him a little bit, but in terms of like small sample size, I feel like that may have been why Porter was left off the list. But at the same time, like, I don't know some of those other guys that made the list. I don't know that they've been better players for very much longer than a guy like Porter has. One thing, too, like with Porter, that I think could maybe limit like him getting to maybe best corner in the league kind of status is he has terrible hands. Like he's just never been a guy
Well,
that's
that's what I was
taken
gonna
the
say is
football
Stingley
away.
had the ball production, right? 5 interceptions, 13
Yeah,
pass deflections last year.
people
So
care about interceptions
31%.
a lot.
Yeah, 31% ball hawk percentage. according to ESPN analytics here. So
Okay.
that is why he is probably the number 10 guy.
Yeah, and I watched Porter. I'll never forget it because I remember watching a specific game where he jumped two routes in cover two that I thought were really good plays, and both of them hit the ball hit him right between the numbers. And he dropped both of them. So like, it
Mhm.
just I don't think I think some of it is like his last year at Penn State. Teams started to avoid him more and more and go after the other side of the field. And then even last year, like he had that really good interception against Lamar on that goal line fade to Odell. But like he was in position to force a lot of incompletions, but he wasn't able to come away with the ball. And we may be talking about that as like a maybe a differentiator between him being one of the best in the league and just like a really good CB1. But either way, man, you got to do at the top of the second round. That's extremely valuable. Really
Yeah.
good player. Like I said, definitely one of the key pieces, for the Steelers defense moving forward.
And to answer the other part of that, because they said about, is he going to travel with ones? I mean, yeah. I mean, you look at the state of the rest
Yeah.
of the. They're
Yes.
not going to ask Dante Jackson, in my opinion, to do that. It's that just goes to show the trust that they had in a rookie. I understand that maybe he didn't get on the field or play as much early on as people expected, but then he did, and he was traveling with ones, which we haven't seen since like Ike. Like they weren't even
Hmm.
doing that when they had Joe Hayden, Steven Nelson, like a
Yep.
really good secondary in 2019. So the faith that they had in this kid as a rookie, I don't see why that would change as a sophomore.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I think, do we see it more? Do we see it less? I don't know. I think we're going to see it when it's necessary. And that's kind of like my thing is like having a guy that you can go to and say like, okay, we're facing, this type of alpha receiver. We think that Porter's length gives us a really good matchup against this guy. But I mean, we even saw him travel with guys of different body types last year. It wasn't always just like bigger physical guys he was
Mhm.
following around. He was asked to do, the same with route runner types and things like that. And I think that Porter held his own. I mean, I'm extremely bullish, on his future. I'm excited about like what he's going to bring to this defense.
Absolutely. Good stuff. Good stuff from the questions as well. We appreciate
Yep.
that. Be back next week. Of course, Alan Saunders should be back on the show. Fingers crossed that that's the case. We'll be back on Monday with him. But Derek, tell the people where they'd find you.
Yep. At Steelers_DB on Twitter and YouTube. I'm actually about to record a video on a rushing concept from Arthur Smith's playbook. So if you guys are interested in some schematic stuff, you can pop over there and catch that one after you watch this video.
There we go. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Not only here, but also on Derek's channel. Leave us a comment here. Let us know how you feel about anything we talked about on the show. Of course, a question for a future episode. Follow us everywhere. That includes TikTok, Steelers Afternoon Drive, posting 90-second clips of the show over there. Leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. If you are listening somewhere else, not on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from, search Steelers Afternoon Drive and you'll find us there. Find me everywhere, Zachary Smith, PGH, for Derrick Bell and myself. Thanks for jumping in. Take another ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive.